Morgoth, thank you so much for joining me. And are you ready to face the gauntlet?
Yeah, hello again, Luke. Yeah, I'm a bit confused by what's happening here, but all right. I never take myself too seriously anyway.
No, the world is changing, and this will become an institution, I'm sure. For round one, do you fancy talking about music, economics, or cosmology?
Music.
Great. Here are your three assertions. Live music is more important than recorded music. Some music genres are better than others. Or the emotional authenticity of music has been diluted. So pick one of
I
these, and then we'll talk about it for 10 minutes.
I will go for the emotional authenticity of music has been diluted.
Great. Do you want to argue in favor or against that?
Oh, I'm absolutely in favor of it. I just think it's I don't even know who's in the charts. I don't know who's been in the charts for 20 years. And like this is, I mean, it's a kind of a stale take when it's this thing where people say nothing has happened since 2000. Like everybody said that, everybody's kind of done the whole Mark Fisher thing, but
Mm.
it is true, and he was right, I think. And I've sort of done some things over the years trying to get to grips with like what actually happened.
Mm.
And my first ever video on YouTube, I think it was the first or second. It might have been the first sort of polished video I did with a bit of editing and whatnot. Even though my videos were never particularly advanced, it was called "Why I Hate Ed Sheeran," and
Mm.
this title here, "The Emotional Authenticity of Music Has Been Diluted." It's perfectly that, and um, and one of the things, because I worked for night shifts, and they would have what we called Capital FM on, and you'd get like 5 songs, and then it would play on a loop forever. And at this
Mm.
time, I think Ed Sheeran, this is like 9 years ago or whatever, and Ed Sheeran must have been sort of at his peak.
Mm.
And I was doing these night shifts, and I had to listen to Ed. I worked it out. I like you got 2 Ed Sheeran songs per hour, and I was doing 10-hour shifts
Oof.
or 12-hour shifts. So I worked it out that I was getting Ed Sheeran, like I was hearing him 24 times per shift, and over like 5 days. What would that be? Like 250 Ed
Yeah.
Sheeran. And I
That's a
began to think
thousand, a thousand a month.
a
Forced
thousand Ed
listens.
Sheeran songs a month. And I began to think of it in terms, firstly, I began to think of it as a kind of emotional sort of torture. And I remembered it's kind of what the Americans did to Islamic extremists at Guantanamo
Yeah.
Bay. And yet I was like, this is my job. And Ed Sheeran in particular, I absolutely hated and I despised them. And I thought there's something horrible and dreadful about his music, but I couldn't. I was like, it is. Why is it so crap? Why do I hate it so much? And it took me a while, and I began to figure it out. And it's because it was this sort of postmodern thing where it wasn't genuinely emotionally authentic. To get back to the subject, it was as if there was a template in existence. There was a certain musical form which was authentic, and he was trying to replicate that rather than just expressing it authentically himself. So when you hear his songs, it's as if he's not actually making an authentic song. There's no real authentic expression in his voice. He's trying to replicate it, and I think, and it leaves you with this kind of flat, sort of soulless thing. But superficially, for normies and all the cabbages out there who buy his records, well, whatever download is whatever it will be now. uh,
Yeah.
like they don't seem to understand that. They don't seem to. I mean, it took me a long time to figure it out. that they are just kind of fine with the fiction. They are fine with the replication of the replication, the replication of a replication of a replication of something that was authentic 40 years ago or whatever. And so what you get is just this kind of flat, soulless, sort of technocratic musical form, which has nothing in it at all. And that's the way I look at it. And primarily it's because I think as a sort of a form, music, does pop music in particular, it doesn't have an infinite number of potentialities. It will be limited. There's only so much you can mine and harvest from what it is before there's just nothing left. And when there's nothing left, all you can do is copy what's been done before. Again, even in the 90s and the 2000s, you got this thing where it was all just music, like literally just clips. What do they call it when they do that? They lift other bits of music and kind of regurgitate it. And that sampling, that all that's doing is taking from what was already there and cannibalizing it. And then Ed Sheeran did this as well, just at a different level, where he would create a whole new song. It would be him with a guitar, but it was like all of the motifs and all of the way the lilts in his voice, it was all done to death. That had all been, it was just hollow and dead. You know, it was just finished, and but he would pass it off as being something artistic, which it wasn't. And that's at the end of the day what music became, just this hollow sort of nothingness. And that's my answer to that.
I've heard the perspective that there is good music out there. It's just that it's no longer in the mainstream. Like there's lots of music, but it's just takes a lot of work to discover. Whereas the stuff that is piped in, you know, the top 40 is degraded for whatever reason. So do you think it's that? Do you think it's that the music that we come across is just weaker?
Yeah, I still don't think that. I still don't think that whatever's out there now is as good as what it was in the past. But yeah, there probably is somebody out there. I discovered one a couple of years back on YouTube. There was a song that I saw. He was called Nomad, and it was some great song. I forgot what it was called now. It was like it had a bit of a sort of lava lamp look to it. And that was just some rando on YouTube. And I thought it was a fantastic song, but he didn't get any traction. And so there is some truth to that, which will take you on as why is the incentives built to sort of pump out rubbish and not decent stuff? Or I don't know. It's as if they want everybody to be stupid.
It does also seem that music plays a smaller part in culture generally. People don't care about bands in the way that they used to. Like music is much more of a passing background thing in young people's lives.
I came across a thing on modern music, which is that the reason why it's all rubbish to somebody who's old like me and like who was into the Britpop scene in my youth, and one of the things is that the way music is consumed now, and it's primarily the way young girls use smartphones and the way that the swipe action. So if you think, I mean, if to push it to the extreme, if you think of something like Pink Floyd's Animals album, like the payoff, which is to say they'll be building up with a set of motifs and a certain set of tunes, and there'll be a payoff. There'll be a certain inversion of the guitar, and you'll drop into a much more emotional chord. And Pink Floyd, for example, would be an extreme version of that, because you may have to wait like 7 or 8 minutes until you get the payoff to a melody. And the girls now, they want to have the payoff with all the record producers and the studios and the actual consumers, especially young girls. They want to have a payoff or a hook within about 10 seconds. And a perfect example of this is there's a Nicki Minaj song which I also used to hear, because obviously I'm not sort of being exposed to this music anymore. But there's a Nicki Minaj song called Starship, which is absolutely degenerate filth. But it has a strange thing where the chorus kicks in after about 11 seconds. And
Immediately, right.
yeah,
There's a saying, don't bore us, get to the chorus.
Yeah, starships will touch the sky, or something like that. And that, yeah, don't bore us, get to the chorus. And they got there within like 11 seconds. And so the payoff was there immediately. And then they just repeat it for the next 2 minutes and make it a bit more sort of hyper. And then the song ends, and then that's it. And the problem that they had was that if they didn't do that, the girls would get bored and they'd move on. It's like the same thing as what they do on those dating apps, where instead of like swiping past pictures of boys, they're just swiping past the music, which doesn't have a hook in it within 10 seconds or whatever. And it's killed it. It's killed it, because you're then compounding the problem of music being hollowed out and dead anyway.
I hadn't. This is maybe a very obvious comparison. I somehow hadn't put together the TikTok sensation with dating apps, but it is like you're trying to match with your perfect 20-second video. you instead of getting to know somebody and falling in love with them over several years, it's like you look at the picture, do you like them or not? Immediately move on to the next one.
Yeah, and it's the same for music.
Right, exactly. There's a song structure that has been around probably in pop music for 100 years, or more, which is verse, chorus, bridge, chorus. And that was always the way that songs were. And those songs tended to be like 3.5 minutes to 4 minutes long. Songs being released now, there's a new format, which is basically chorus, verse, verse, chorus. It's like,
yeah,
or even just one verse in the middle, like chorus, verse, chorus, something like that. Like a much simpler, short, and the songs end up being more like 2 minutes long. And of those 2 minutes, most of it is just 3 copies of the exact same chorus. Like the verse is almost, you can imagine in a couple of years it'll be the fully released song is just a chorus, and there is no verse. Like the amount of complexity and elaboration in the form, you imagine we've come from sonata form down to pop song, down to like 20-second TikTok, and that's the current mode.
The payoff and the catharsis has to be there almost immediately, or it'll just get swiped past. And that's kind of just the way. That's just the culture. That's just, and these are the people who are going to grow up and run the West. Good luck with that.
Great. Well, I'm going to give you a score of 11 for round 1. And
what, 11 out of what?
There's no cap. It's just.
All right.
It's just an arbitrary number. But I will tell you that 11 is an extremely strong score. I think the average score is probably 9.5 for my contestants so far. So you're batting well above average.
I'll go for history.
Great. National histories are entirely constructed narratives. History moves in cycles, or technological advancements are the primary drivers of historical change. And remember, you can argue for or against any of these.
The thing is, I'm obviously tempted to do a Spengler dump on the middle one, just to sort of roll out, just like the greatest hits.
Right.
But I think I'll go for the technological advancements or the primary drive, because I've got an old take on that as well, which I can dust off.
Yeah, this is like digging into the Morgoth archives.
Yeah, it is.
I'm glad that all these takes just live in your head, ready to go at any moment.
Well, I mean, it's a bit of a tangent, but one of the things about actually when you write stuff down, which I have to, whether it's just for a blog or for the or for a video essay, is that it means that you've took a concept and fully fleshed it out, and it tends to live there. It tends to live in your brain, so you can go back and kind of visit it. And actually, all of these things which are there, I've done videos on, and I could go back. I mean, national histories are entirely constructed narratives. Obviously you can go to the post-war sort of bulldog nationalist type thing. History moves in cycles. Yeah, you get the Spengler stuff, but the technological advancements are the primary drivers of historical change. I mean, again, like I did a video, I think it was back in 2020 or 2021, and I actually played the game Civilization 5 all the way through. And it just so happened that I had some internet friends who I knew in real life, and they came to visit me. It was a couple. And the issue of conspiracy theories came up, and it was one of those things where this was kind of like when I was sort of really submerged in Spengler as well, because the two bottom questions are well, they're all related, like, but this idea that history is planned out by whether it's a certain tribe or the Freemasons or the Illuminati or whoever, and you get into this weird place where I kept asking, well, I mean, even somebody like Mozart would be, he was a high level Freemason in this sort of the conspiracy frame.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, and I was like, well, does that mean that we can't listen to Mozart anymore because he was somehow wrong, or he was pumping out a subversive message, or like maybe he just genuinely was a genius? And it would be like, well, nobody gets to where they are. He wouldn't be in that situation if he didn't do the bidding of other people for a larger purpose. And it was as if it was as if, like, whenever you try to touch something solid within that, whenever you try to find something which isn't part of the conspiracy, it kind of just falls apart like a cobweb, and you realize actually that was planned as well. Everything was planned. Like literally absolutely everything. There's nothing which has happened just organically in an emergent way. And it kind of did my head in. And I deliberately went back because I couldn't, I found it just very, very difficult to argue up against, because every time, it was like, every time you kind of struck a blow against it, it would job that, and he has he has the Kabbalah geometria numbers to prove it, and all of this. And for some reason, I think at that time, it was during lockdown and they were giving video games away free. So I got Civilization 5 downloaded for free. Like, I love a bargain. And I was playing it through. I know the games very well. I've played, especially Civilization 2 on the PlayStation. I played to death. So I knew the gist of it. And what I discovered when I played it was that when you begin, and I did the whole video on this, but when you, at the beginning of Civilization, the game, when you start off, everything's kind of the same. You've got your basic scouts, you've got a little camp, and you've got some people chopping wood, and all the different civilizations are the same. But then, because they've all got their own characteristics and their own unique sort of traits, the civilizations begin to diverge, and then in roundabout what would be for Europeans the Middle Ages and onwards into the main civilization phase, they become radically different because they followed these different paths. And then let's say you've got like 7 civilizations on the board. Slowly but surely, the weaker ones would start and get eliminated and disappeared, and there would be fewer and fewer civilizations left until eventually there'll just be, say, 2 or 3. And
Mm.
and another thing that I noticed was that by the time you get to the late era, by the time you get into the 20th century, all of the civilizations are almost identical. They've all got railways. They've all had like the incentives of the game have meant that all of them have had to, the civilizations that would survive, for example, have had to prioritize gunpowder and industrialization over religion and art, because at the end of the day, the material conditions will be that no matter how devout you are, I mean, there's some get outs of this where you can subvert civilizations with religion and things, but basically, a gunpowder will always, riflemen will always triumph over a great artistic achievement. So those who, again, I've got to tread carefully around the issue of religion and civilization, but just purely in artistic terms, and or people who just like me wanted to live in a little hobbitshire where everything kind of stayed in sort of the Middle Ages and everybody had a plot of land, like make paradise, you just get wiped out. And what that means is that there's a kind of evolutionary force being pushed down on the civilizations until they all end up kind of very, very similar. So, like in today's world, there's not that much difference between, say, China and America, or that there's not that much difference between Russia and Poland.
Mm.
There'll be a few bits and bobs here and there, but basically, all of these different civilizations will end up being the same, because if they didn't go for efficiency and industrialization, rifles over spears and this kind of thing, they'd end up going extinct. And this got me thinking and ties back to the conspiracy kind of stuff, because all of a sudden I realized that actually the shadowy elites, the hidden hand, it doesn't have an infinite amount of potential, because it is constrained, and it's constrained by technology. So the way I kind of approached this was to say, okay, in George Stevenson, who just not from the Northeast, he came up with a steam engine. Was that part of the conspiracy? You can say, well, yeah, but at the end of the day, it was just to take coal from Newcastle and get it south to the shipyards to get it this kind of thing. Like there was a need on a civilizational level. It was providing a solution to a problem. I don't think and it also drastically altered how we viewed the world. The steam engine would collapse the distance from Newcastle to London, or London and Edinburgh, or this kind of thing. So our world, it had these massive changes on our world, but it was outside of a conspiracy sort of ruling class. It was genuinely an emergent form. So I realized that actually the you can't have a history which is just completely planned out like that, because as if you're playing Civilization, the decisions that the hidden hand would make have to be conducive to civilization surviving, and that brings you to technological advancements. They're always going to have to choose the technological efficiency over having some kind of esoteric bloodletting cult in the streets or whatever. So that's how I'd take that one.
There's this idea in psychology. Was it actually Jonathan Haidt who proposed this? That there's like an elephant and a rider, and the rational part of your brain is just sitting on top of this elephant, trying to give it a little bit of a steer. And most of the decisions you make are these low-level subconscious process. The reptilian brain dominates most of it. I wonder if there's a similar dynamic in history whereby there is a group of people atop the elephant trying to make it move, but they are still having to deal with the realities of the world. They're like, they can only push the people so far. They can only work with the technology and the geopolitical situation that they're faced with. So they can try to steer the elephant, but the way that history moves is also dominated by things like technological progress as well.
I think that's exactly what happened with the so-called Great Reset. It seems to me they wanted us living this kind of idealized Star Trek universe, which would be more like slavery. But then Putin invaded Ukraine and just sort of wrecked everything, because it meant that actually it was a reminder that actually nations still exist, and they've got armies, and they've also got interest. They've also so sorry, but you're going to have to put your kind of gay techno dystopia on the back burner for a while. I mean, in actual fact, it seems like we could still get it in some sort of bastardized form, but that's a whole different discussion, I think.
Great. Well, let's bring that round to an end. And do you know what? I'm going to give you another 11. On to round 3. Cinema and theatre, world affairs, or epistemology?
I'll go for cinema and theatre.
I had a feeling you would. Cinema is most important for its visual spectacle. Creators have a moral responsibility to challenge society. Or, and I suppose conversely, entertainment is the primary utility of cinema.
I think I disagree with all of them.
These are not intended to be my positions. That take up whichever side you like.
I think I'll go for, it's low hanging fruit, but I'll take down cinema is most important for its visual spectacle. I mean, now I was about to backpedal, but now you've kind of I'm in it now.
You can if you like.
No, I can't. I'm in now. I'm in because when I was agreeing to it, I was thinking of like going after all like the sort of CGI sort of rubbish that comes out now, because that is visually spectacular. But the problem but then like I got flashes in my mind of like Lawrence of Arabia and Citizen Kane and all of these kinds of things, because it's easy to go overboard and think of, well, actually I like, because I do like something like Glenn Ross, or films where there's like 5 men with like a horrible problem that they've got to solve. Like 13 Days about the Cuban Missile Crisis is an excellent film. And it's
or something.
Yeah, it's where you've got like men like sort of smoking cigarettes and drinking coffee, like shouting at each other because they don't know how to solve this intractable problem, you know. And there's lots of good films like that about the 2008 bank crash. There's like was it The Big Short, and there's a few other ones as well, where it's like these kind of not ethnically correct so bankers are sitting in offices in New York late at night, like looking at lines going down on computers and panicking and all this kind of, and I like all of that. And there's not much visual spectacle there at all. It's just that the tension and the drama's laid on. And so this would be like I mean, something like the Godfather, which would be a classic. It's easy to think, well, you know, it doesn't have CGI dragons and planets exploding or anything, and this is kind of the problem why I saw that I dug myself a bit of a hole, because The Godfather is actually a visual spectacle. So is something like Goodfellas. So you can't actually separate it, but I do think that you could do something like that if it was just, I mean, it was a novel. but so it isn't reliant on that the visual spectacle. I mean, I just saw the I've done a lot of streams on 2 streams on June, the new June stuff, and yeah, that's a visual spectacle, and yes, that's kind of all it is because it falls flat in other directions. Cinema is most important for its visual spectacle. So I'm on the fence about it, really. Yeah, if I'm honest. Yeah, I mean, you're gonna give us like 3 points for this one, like, but I'm gonna say cinema is most important for its visual spectacle. No, I
I,
don't think it is.
I guess you could argue that the type of entertainment that you're talking about could be captured in a theater. Like you could go and watch people perform The Big Short and get
Yeah,
most of the same entertainment factor. So the distinctive thing about theatre, and you mentioned June and the fact that its main contribution as a film is its visual spectacle. But of course, that's only because we already have the book. If
yeah.
the script had been written from scratch, it would be an absolute marvel. I would argue the people who are going to watch the film who already love the books, in a way, are evaluating the film as what does it add over what already existed. But the source material already was incredible, and so if you want to give credit to the film and ignore the existence of the book, then it's a really it's firing on a lot of cylinders.
It's like me of the latest film, the latest June film. My favorite scene was when Paul rides a worm for the first time. I thought that was very well done. I mean, that was pure spectacle. But I don't
Mm.
actually remember any of the dialogue, none of the dialogue, none of the moments between humans. Because when we're talking about having something in a theater, they've got nothing to fall back on like that. You know, where like literally running across like a giant sand dune, and you get this kind of big widescreen shot of him running across, and then it was a old grandfather worm which was like half a mile long. It crashes through the dune, creating a kind of big hole in the dune, which begins to collapse. He then jumps onto the back of the worm with the grappling hooks, and he's getting like lashed with all of this sand in his face. And it's also moving at what seems to be like 60 miles an hour. And then he kind of clambers up onto the top of it, and his legs are wobbling. And he gets the grappling hooks properly in and turns them into reins. And then you get like a big Hans Zimmer sort of, payoff. Um, so yeah, that's great. But in terms of human tension between humans, in a if you think just to say use The Godfather, which would be an obvious one, you do remember where it's literally just Al Pacino sitting in a leather chair as the camera slowly pans out. Like not much is happening there. Or when he knows his brother has betrayed him and he grabs his face and kisses him on the forehead, and we know that it's actually the kiss of death. He is going to murder his own brother, and that kind of thing is more impactful than the epic sort of jump off a sand dune and riding the worm thing. I think
Mm.
to a more mature, thoughtful audience, those kinds of human interactions are actually more epic than the spectacle, because you're thinking in your personal life and you're thinking
Sure.
about things which you've kind of been through and experienced with other people. Whereas for pure visual spectacle, you've got no frame of reference for that. I've never even run across. I've never even been to the desert.
You've
Never
never
mind.
even ridden a small soundworm.
Yeah, I've never been. I've never been. I picked a few up and chucked them into the veg patch yesterday. That's about as close as I got. It should have been a huge Hans Zimmer sound, wham, wham, wham music.
Throwing the worms. Wah.
Yeah, yeah, the Hans Zimmer, wow. And I
I,
watched them wriggle into the soil as well.
I thought the way the Baron was portrayed, especially in the first Dune movie, Skarsgård's performance was quite good. The thing where he sinks into the bathtub, it's quite a strong. And as I understand it, that's not in the books. The bathtub, although it was in the Lynch adaptation of Dune.
Yeah, I mean, well, in the
The kind of
book,
oil bath, which
it,
is a kind of a representation of the fact that the Dune is in this uber comfortable, almost spa-like environment, whilst creating war and conflict out there beyond his reach.
yeah, he is decadence, as opposed to the sort of hard life on Arrakis, and also, I felt like I don't want to bore everybody to death with June again. I just thought it was in the book he talks a lot. He's a bit of a blabbermouth, Baron Harkonnen, and he's always scheming and making bad jokes and just being a bit of an asshole. And in the films, it was more like they were building up to something with the visual spectacle, which never actually paid off. He just stayed that way till the end. Yeah.
Yeah, good. All right. Well, I suppose I have to give you a score. This is the problem with this format is I sort of fundamentally disagree with the concept that I've created here, that I have to give numbers to conversations. But here we are. You know what? Another 11. All right. Psychology, elite theory, or theology?
I'll go. I'm pretty sure everybody would have chose elite theory, so I'm going to go for psychology.
Hey, all right. Here are your three options. Power corrupts. Mental health issues must be destigmatized. Or gender differences in biology are rooted in... Sorry, gender differences in behavior are rooted in biology.
I'll go for the mental health issues because I often, because I've got takes on that as well. I'm not sure if it relates to this directly, but I do find the issue of male mental health, and again, an older stuff that I used to do was on the suicide problem of young men. And mental health issues must be destigmatized. Like, I don't think they even are destigmatized that much these days. My view on this is that this sort of therapeutic language is there to cover up what are actually societal issues and societal problems. Because I think if you just to stick with Britain, but it's for the West in general, I think the West in general is a madhouse. I think it's unhealthy. I think it's not natural. It's got no kind of transcendence to it. It's a profoundly sick and twisted society that we live in. And to ask the politicians to do something about it is a big ask, because you're talking a complete overhaul of everything and every way the media we consume, the economic system, even the kind of the managerialism, but even deeper than that, the very kind of instrumental reason and complete lack of spirituality or metaphysics that brought us here. All of that would have to be completely all thrown out in order to solve this problem of just how sick the society is. And what I find interesting is that as if to sort of explain this, what they do is whittle it down to the individual level, and they say, well, actually, society is kind of fine, but because we're all just individuals, and that you're depressed and you're having suicidal thoughts, that's like, that can't be a problem with society in general. So it has to be you that's the problem. It's yet you don't fit in, and so we are going to diagnose you on the individual level, rather than take a broader look that it might well be the society that's making you sick. It's like the complete opposite of a sort of Ben Shapiro or Jordan Peterson kind of worldview. Like I understand that it's easy. I understand it's easy to just say, well, actually, it's not my fault. It's society that's the problem, because there is a sort of laziness to that. There's a sort of there's an ingrained helplessness to that. There's a it's kind of it's a left wing way of thinking as well. Well, it's even a cliche. Let's just blame society for all our problems. But I actually think it is society. That's the problem. Like, what if it actually is? What if the culture is sending people insane? What if we're just not supposed to live the way we live? Why don't we ask those questions? Why are we leaving it to the left? Why is it that the normie can't take is to actually go along in a way with the therapeutic state, which says, well, it's just a you problem. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Because I've known people, I've known quite a few people who've committed suicide, and one in particular who threw himself under a train 10 years ago. That was a harrowing thing to see, because he had a he'd already had problems. He already didn't fit in particularly well. He was actually a bit of a ladies' man when he was younger, but he did a lot of drink and he did a lot of drugs, and he was always a little bit sort of outside of the norm. He was more of a poetic soul. And there was on Facebook, when this was a thing back then, a girl dumped him publicly on Facebook, and I remember seeing he replied to it, and he said, you shouldn't be doing this with me when I'm in recovery. And then all of her friends started taunting him and like taking the piss. And then 5 hours after that, he threw himself under a train. And that kind of little interaction it was stuck there on Facebook. Everybody knew what had happened. And I thought, if you break down into what happened there, there's a multitude of reasons. Like, how responsible was he for that? Like, what you get into this, like, what kind of agency does he have? Or is he just programmed by the wider society? But you can see straight away that he wasn't fit. He didn't fit in very well, mainly because women problems had destroyed him over the years. He got a divorce, which he was in for life to pay off this woman as she went on holiday. So you can see there's a problem straight away, is that the breakdown of his original marriage and the way he was taken to the cleaners, where he was paying, he was like working all the hours God sends. She already had another fella and he was paying for their holidays. And he couldn't get out of it because of child support maintenance. So you can say, okay, straight away, this collapse in marriage and the way it's rigged against men is a problem. And then you also get into the sort of, I mean, a lot of it's to do with women, to be honest. But you can then say the amount of taxes that he had, or the lack of solidarity with friends, and you kind of think. I mean, he certainly wasn't destigmatized with mental health, and you can even say, well, was he mentally ill, or was it that he'd been driven mad by the world he lived in? And I don't know. I certainly don't think it's a cut and dry thing. If you say to him, because people did say to him, pull yourself up give yourself a shake. You're overthinking all of this, and yeah, he killed himself anyway. So, was it just him, or was it society?
It's funny. I actually had a similar. I don't know if experience is the right word. There was somebody who I guess was a one step removed from me. I didn't know them directly, but I knew people who knew them well. And almost the same thing happened to them, where they had it was on Facebook. They had a acrimonious back and forth with some girls his age, and and then like a few hours later he went and threw himself in front of a train and died. And yeah, you have to pick apart that that's not that's not a rational response to what was going on. In a way that you can't hold the people up who were interacting with him on social media as having killed him. I don't think that they were intending for him to kill himself. And so and I'm sure he had. I think he did have learning difficulties as well. So clearly there was some significant issues going on inside his own brain. But I also resonate a lot with what you're saying about the brokenness of society, and I've got a take, which is you know how we think of teenagers as hormonal, and they have all of these mood swings because of biology, and I kind of think actually what happens is you reach a certain age and it becomes apparent to you in some deep intuitive way how broken society is. You kind of live in innocence during your first 10 years or so of your life, and then you kind of wake up and you think all these adults think everything's fine, but like this thing that we're living in isn't working. So there's kind of it's a very rational reaction for teenagers to almost allergically react against the culture that we've all created together.
Yeah, and I mean, I was kind of singing the praises of 90s music before, but I think there's also the bands that were around. Like, if you think of something like Radiohead, I do like Radiohead, and I do like Nirvana or the Smashing Pumpkins, or these acts from that era when we would have been growing up. Like, yeah, it was good. It was better than the music that you have now, but at the same time, it was also sowing a kind of neuroticism and self pity in people as well. Where you do become this. What they're kind of pointing towards is that you have this internal universe, and that you're kind of unique and special, and that your problems are more profound and grandiose than everybody else's problems. There's a certain sort of self-absorption, which I think when people face genuine hardship in the real world, that's catastrophic, because it's as if you've been weakened. It's as if you've been hamstrung. Whereas if you think the generation that fought the war, or the 1950s, they wouldn't have had all of that. They would have been tougher and more resilient. And this is probably why you didn't see that much. But again, they also had a healthier society. The woman that they settled down with wouldn't have been round the block. She wouldn't have spent 10 years screwing around in bars and all of this kind of thing. And then, so I totally take on board that there's a kind of self-absorbed individualism which been sowed into a lot of people. But it's also the case that there's a promise. As a young man, there would have been a promise. I don't think you even get the promise now, but there was at least the promise of 2.2 kids and a dog, and you're going to grill outside and this kind of thing, a kind of happy domestic bliss, which was the norm. And there comes a point when you realize actually that's not really likely anymore, not in the way that you think. And it's not going to be this kind of ideal at all. You're gonna get shoddy goods. It's not going to be what you hoped for. And so there's a kind of disenchantment and disillusionment kicks in at the age that you were mentioning there as well. I certainly had it. When I realized that my first major girlfriend went off to university, and I thought it was just this massive tragedy. I couldn't understand it. So just to get back to the issue here, I do think there's this tendency to whittle down and just not even consider what we've been talking about there in terms of, well, maybe it is society that's driving you mad. And I like to think about that more, even though it's kind of left coded in a way. Because if you're sort of as reactionary as I've become over the years, you're more comfortable saying that. You're more comfortable saying if you move away from the kind of center right style of sort of
No.
individualism and you get into a more reactionary mindset, you can think, well, actually, yeah, it is society that's driving you mad.
There's definitely some instincts that I see on the left that are actually correct. I feel in a strange sense that there are blind spots on the right where the actually the right has a very normie perspective on some things that, I mean, on balance, the left are absolutely way off the mark on that, especially their conclusions and their solutions. You know, I mean, their blind spots are the size of a planet, and maybe the right has blind spots the size of a moon in slightly different places. But
Yeah,
yeah,
there's like on paper. I mean, I even think that things are going downhill now. I mean, 10 or 15 years ago, but what I'm talking about would probably been correct more 10 or 15 years ago. I think there's a wider acknowledgement now that things are in a big mess.
hmm,
You get now you're getting now these girls. I wrote an article about this a month or two back. We get these girls with their mobile crying into their TikTok videos
hmm,
because they can't afford to pay the bills. They can't. So their promise has been they've been betrayed as well. And there's a tendency to say, well, this is there's like the anti-feminist take where they chose this, which they didn't, because you're looking at 25-year-old a 25-year-old woman never had any choice if she wanted to
no,
work or not.
no,
But then at the same time, it's kind of like, or like we should get married and that would be the problem solved, or all of this kind of thing. And at the end of the day, it's somebody who is completely miserable and is struggling, and it's not really her fault. That is like a societal problem there. And I think people should blame those in power rather than the women themselves. But they could also be diagnosed under this sort of therapeutic way. Just say, well, if you're having a mental breakdown, really, it's just because you haven't learned to think about it properly. We need to re-engineer your thinking. I got in touch with some Samaritan organization years ago on Twitter, and I told them I was depressed about the demographic changes taking place in England. And
how did they react to that?
they said they weren't a political organization, and I said, but yeah, I'm not. I don't know what the political solution is. I'm just telling you that it was a troll, but it was kind of like
Yeah,
I was saying, well, on an individual level, this is making me profoundly depressed because I'm seeing fewer and fewer people like me around. What do I do about this?
yeah,
And they had
yeah.
no
If
response.
if they can make a label that is seasonal affected disorder, as in the reason you're depressed is because of the weather, the temperature, the amount of sunlight, then surely they could invent a label for like demographic affected disorder or something. It's
Well,
like,
they do. There's all kinds of phobias now, but it's purely cynical. Like
right,
nobody's it's nobody's actually scared of gay people.
right, but the phobic
Yeah,
label,
it
yeah,
adds on the
well,
idea. What it does is add
yeah,
on again the idea that you are the problem. You
right,
as an individual are the problem, not wider
yes.
society.
We need a set of we need to come up with language. I think language is so powerful, and we just don't take enough advantage of it. Somebody should come up with a term that's the opposite. So like instead of like sexist, implying that it's a problem, we shouldn't just embrace that term. We should come up with an alternative that's like the wholesome and courageous recognition of truth in a certain realm.
Yeah. The Irish Constitution was like the way that the role of the women was like written in that was just perfectly done.
Yeah.
And they won as well. Like that was perfect framing, where the common
Yeah.
good is for the woman to be in the home and this kind of thing.
Well, I'm going to give you 12 for that because I thought you knocked it out of the park.
Oh, great.
On to round 5. 5 out of 6. Technology, natural sciences, or Christology?
I'll go for natural sciences.
Evolution is the origin of species. There's been no progress in physics for decades. Or material science is the source of most innovation. I don't think I've heard you talk about any of these subjects. So,
Well, I'll go for evolution as the origin of species because I get a lot of pushback. I've actually read more Richard Dawkins than most people. And especially the earlier stuff. I'm just looking over at the bookshelf there. The big one was called The Ancestor's Tale. But I've read all of the other ones as well. Is it Unweaving the Rainbow or something? There's so I was reading his
Greatest Show on Earth, I remember, was
The
one.
Greatest Show on Earth was another one as well. Because I was always interested in the natural world. And what I kind of I was late to the internet, but I lived in Europe for a long time, and I saw certain the demographic changes, and I became interested in, like, how can I put this delicately for YouTube? Human biodiversity became a subject of interest to me because of what I was seeing in Europe. And somehow I got the impression that Richard Dawkins was like this sort of, he was going to spell it out. He was going to tell the truth. And so I got I read them widely, but the Ancestor's Tale was this huge tome. And the idea of it is that you're going to begin with the most primitive sort of little globule of bacteria. And then he's going to describe the processes where it evolves. And I thought, this is great because it's going to end up getting to humans. And I'm going to find out a little bit about modern human evolution and why modern humans are different. And so I read it all, the whole thing. I think it's like 1,200 pages of like the world being explained by evolution, which some of it's fantastic. I mean, I'll come back to that, I think. But I got through all of the whole thing, and then it was like, and then after the chimpanzees and whatnot, the modern humans arrived, and I was like, yeah, okay, but there's clearly differences. If now that I completely understand the thesis that a living organism will have basic pressures placed upon it in order to survive and to reproduce, that its genetic code will have to pass through the ages, pass from one generation to another. It's the code that stays alive. The actual individual creature is just sort of a carrier. If you go ultimately where he in the Dawkins thing, but I didn't get any explanation of why modern humans are different at all. I just thought that it's like 1,200 pages. But leaving that aside, it's just okay, so that's that, and we're all just the same, which is clearly not. But you could clear. But to me, it was important because what it meant was that certain people had left Africa, and they were then under different evolutionary pressures than people who stayed. And where they went in the world, it was the climate and the land itself which was shaping people. So that made sense to me, but I didn't have it more fully fleshed out until a bit later. But as for the people, don't like that. I'm sure people in the right, they don't like. There's a lot of the sort of the racial nationalists don't like the out of Africa theory, for example. But then, of course, there's a lot of Christians who don't like any of that either. And I often get a lot of pushback because I do think that evolution is just the best theory of why things are the way they are. And I think it's depressing because if you take the human part out of the just park that to one side for a bit, and you look at the natural world itself. Dawkins is right now. I know he's cringe. I know the God delusion, and all of that, but he is right that it is actually an elegant explanation and theory of life on Earth. And when you get into the sort of the nitty gritty of the animal world itself, it's really wonderful just to read through it. For example, how one of the big in the ancestor's tale, he replies to people who say things like, how could this happen and how could that happen in evolution? Like, why, for example, why is it that there's not a rhinoceros that has a horn which is, say, 4 meters long? Because it would have just evolved over time and then there's a payoff, because it will reach a point where there's no longer the costs to having a 4 meter long horn on the front of your face would not be worth the negatives of, say, finding food or having neck problems or this kind of thing. So there's an equilibrium will be found. And there's another big one on octopus eyes. Like, there's a huge chunk on how the octopus and squids evolved eyes. That was like a major headache to explain because it seems like the things that came before them didn't have eyes, and it was almost how do you get that? How does mammals have eyes, or how do these things have eyes? Why would they? All of this kind of thing. And just basic little things. The classic would be that the whale, if you look at a whale's skeleton, it actually has like little feet still attached. You can see the appendages which were feet. And a whale and a dolphin, it moves up and down in a sort of undulating way, whereas an actual proper fish, like a trout or a shark, will go from side to side. And it goes up and down because it was once an animal that walked the earth. So a lion or a fox walks, or a horse, it too has this up and down motion rather than side to side. And so all these little things that say actually all of this is connected, and it all does make sense. And so I just think it's sad when the problem that we have is always political. It's always people are going to call me, oh, Morgoth's just a cringe new atheist and all of it. They're going to get us that. What is it? The hat. I'll be, everybody on Twitter will be. What do they call that hat? The fat
fedora.
The fedora. I'm a fedora tipping new atheist. I'm actually not. I just love the natural world, and I think it's evolution is quite an amazing way to look at the natural world. Just basic things like insects, and these kinds of things. So the evolution, in my opinion, is the origin of species, and people don't like it because it's always, whether it's today's liberals, it's because the implications for racial issues, which they don't like. And then you also have religious people who hate it as well. Because it kind of removes a creator, and that everybody knows about that. But if you just stick it to the basics, for example, a bat, like if you look at a bat is like more or less a squirrel that flies. And if you look at its wings, and how its wings function, it's a flap of skin which is attached between its thumb and then its forefinger, and then across, I think, 2 other fingers or something, and then it has like a finger left for hooking onto things. So it makes sense. You think, okay, so how did that happen? Well, I mean, not even to get into the fact that it uses sonar, these kind of high-pitched clicks that it makes. But you can see that there was an incentive for a squirrel creature to jump between one tree and another. And a flying squirrel actually exists. So the squirrel that can use flaps of skin between its armpit will actually do better. It can actually jump further. So it's going to be safer. It's going to get more food. and so it's going to go on to reproduce better. And so its offspring will have a bigger flap because it's going to be that line of genes, but then more sort of concentrated. And so it'll go until eventually, giving enough generations, you'll end up with a bat, which will just leave the trees altogether. And that's this kind of thing I find fascinating.
Yeah, I feel sort of conflicted on this topic because I think there's quite compelling thinking on both sides. So as you're laying out, I think there's very compelling evidence that evolution is a part of the natural world and affects the behavior of animals over multiple generations, and the kind of basic concept is not only kind of mathematically sound but can be demonstrated as happening, right? We see evolution happen if you experiment with bacteria, you can evolve it to be resistant to a drug, for example. Or you can watch moths change color as the trees are affected by pollution, and then the ones that are more camouflaged survive and have children and so on. On the other hand, I'm just cautious about the complete confidence that the mechanism has been proven to explain all of these things, rather than just it being possible that could have happened. And partly the reason that I'm so cautious about it is because the main argument trumpeted in that corner is that it's the scientific consensus. And of course, the scientific consensus was also ringing with regards to COVID and with regards to climate change. And so this is just not a group of people that I have a great deal of trust in. And I don't think the methods are as well. I'd say there are some very rigorous individual scientific papers that, the way of thinking, there are things about the way that scientists, like genuine scientists, approach the world that I endorse. Where I think it falls apart is the process of peer review and bringing together ideas from different disciplines, and I think that's where a lot more power dynamics are at play, and the process of arriving at truth is much more based on what we are supposed to believe than a genuine seeking of truth.
It also goes back to what I one of the sort of counters to evolution is the hidden hand theory, because then they'll Charles Darwin. If you dig into Charles Darwin's background, I mean, don't worry, he was actually English, but apparently he was also in elite circles in these. Again, this isn't me. This is what people say if I say I believe in evolution, and it'll be like, well, Charles Darwin is just sort of to science. He was a Freemason. He was in this particular elite group, and also what it was just a kind of scientific version of Marxism. In other words, you had within a few years of each other these two kind of materialistic broadsides at what was say devout Christian settled civilization. You suddenly get these kind of materialistic neutron bombs, which are also very depressing. I mean, Marx, whatever, but it also is the implications of evolution are not pretty. And like I say, I've read a lot of Dawkins, and he always copes about the implications of what he's saying here. Oh well, you can be happy that there's a beautiful dawn, or enjoy the flowers and all of this. But the problem is you've kind of broken the mold. He's at the same time disenchanting the world, but then also pretending as if, well, now that we are just advanced bacteria sitting on this rock, screaming around in space for no reason whatsoever. Now that we've established all of that as quote unquote a fact, well, just sit back and enjoy the roses, because that, or enjoy Mozart, enjoy Beethoven. Again, with the problem being, which is what we have now, that all of the things, except for just aesthetic beauty of the natural world in and of itself, in cultural terms, everything of worth was created by people who were religious, essentially. And like there hasn't, the era which came after has been like utterly devoid of real beauty. It's never a materialist frame can't replicate it. I mean, a lot of my content, if you scratch the surface, is dealing with this and coming to terms with this. I just did an article where I climbed the mountain in Mountain de Mons, where I was talking about this. And so it's depressing, because it does leave you at a kind of with nothing. You can only glory at the wonders of nature for so long, when eventually, even the bat with its wing is going to lose any kind of mystery to it. You're unlocking all of these secrets and mysteries if you believe it. And it isn't rewarding in any kind of spiritual sense at all. And so people will say, like, this was deliberate. This was a deliberate attempt. Like, Darwin was in with the elites, and it was a deliberate attempt to usher in this purely materialistic age, which I fully take on board. I fully get that.
To link back to the first round, it's interesting thinking about the secularization of society and then the decline in meaningful art. I feel like a lot of the songs that have been successful are quite shallow and almost animalistic in their they're either angry or they're like just pure expressions of lust and desire. So it's like we've lost our higher spiritual faculties, and therefore we're settling for less transcendent expression as a result.
Yeah, and kind of becoming degraded to the point where, I mean, if you look at a lot of the like you say, like a lot of the mainstream culture, it is just this kind of, it's like animals. You look at a lot. It's kind of back to nature, but it's not romantic, and it's not particularly. It's not nice. It's not comfy, and it's not cozy. It's quite repulsive, actually.
There's this idea that, well, perhaps religion has a social benefit. We don't have to believe it, but we can kind of perform it and get the same benefits. I feel like that's what the Marvel films have been, in a way. It's all the trappings of a religion, but nobody believes that it's real, and it just feels so diluted and terrible to me.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people will ask me, like you're kind of like a cultural Christian, and a lot of the things you talk about are Christian, and my kind of sense of morality or wanting wonder in the world and these kinds of things, and I'd say, well, I just can't fake it. I'm just gonna have to say, I just get the feeling that I am in this kind of the spell was broken and there's no going back. There's nothing to be done. Which is quite depressing, but I think it's a common thing, and I don't want to become some kind of, I don't want to pretend or anything like that. And to be honest, the fact that I've read like so much Richard Dawkins might have something to do with it. I mean, it's a bit of a tangent, and it's why I'm not the fedora tipper. But when I was reading Dawkins, I had an uncle who was in the very devout Christian, and I remember, and this is going back about, what is it, like 20 years or something, when the God Delusion came out, something like that. And I remember reading it, and I remember thinking, I can't wait to get back to Christmas and own him. Like, I've got so many hot takes. I've got so many. I've got so many of these things now. And he was a real nice gentleman, you know, an uncle of mine. And I thought, I'm going to run into him over Christmas, and I'm going to like,
Destroyed.
I'm going to destroy. And
this Christmas, Morgoth crushes Uncle with facts.
Around the Christmas table, with this smug dick attitude, like, oh, how are you going to answer this one? Oh, I know how he's going to answer this one, because I saw the Christopher Hitchens debate against that American pastor, and all of that, and in more recent years, and I think it never happened, thank God. And more recent years, I just think of me thought processes, and I just shiver. It makes me want to just bite the knuckles on the back of my hand with just the sheer cringe of being yeah. Now I've read God Delusion. I can't wait to hit him on Christmas with some of these. And I just think, God, I'm so glad that nothing ever came to pass.
It was a very interesting time. I mean, I was a Christian back in those days, but I used to watch all those debates with Christopher Hitchens and Sam Harris, Daniel Dennett, Richard Dawkins, and I really enjoyed them. And I mean, it did always feel like the suave and sophistication and the witty turns of praise and the charisma was all in the atheist's corner, and you had these kind of sheep being wheeled out to be eaten up by wolves. But it would be interesting. I'd enjoy watching one of those back with you, like almost a retrospective. Go back, what would it be, 15 years almost now, and watch one of the old debates and reflect on how differently it hits in 2024 versus how it felt in 2011.
Yeah, and especially because you think, like, actually it was all of that, like all of those debates had happened like 150 years beforehand. We'd been through the whole saga of Darwin or Nietzsche, and at least there was much more profound insights into the question of, as they call it, like Nietzsche call it, the death of God. Like this is like something which is cataclysmic for your civilization. The idea that it will be reduced to a few gotchas and all of this is really quite trivial and embarrassing and cringe and pathetic. And that's exactly how the new atheists carried themselves.
The spice from the new atheists, I feel, was all based in 9/11. It was very much a post World Trade Center. Like, it was America reckoning with the kind of the religious impulse as being malignant. Like that they had this multicultural experiment. They wanted to continue to believe in diversity, so therefore they had to expunge the dangerous ideas, and they were going to do that with kind of intellectual jousting. And it turned, yes, it's then interesting to trace it through to atheism plus, which was almost a reckoning with the fact that the new atheist movement, which had proclaimed simultaneously to be the moral arbiters of society, and simultaneously declaring that there was no such thing as good or evil, and that this was just a kind of basic illusion, that they couldn't have both. Either they had to propose a moral framework, which some people tried to do, and it obviously caused complete political fracturing and destruction, or the people who've stuck doggedly to the new atheist guns, like Dawkins, now feel quite old-fashioned.
And if you, it's interesting to put it in that context, because if you have the 9/11 world, and then you have the rise of the neocons, and then there's this idea that, well, we're going to go around the world, we're going to bomb everybody into liberal democracy, we'll turn everywhere into like California or whatever, and everybody will be good, compliant consumers, and they especially with Islam, they hit this hard rock where, well, that's not going to fly. And it's as if, like, 20 years later, they've because these kind of rationalistic liberal arguments just weren't sufficient. They wouldn't work. And it's as if, like, 20 years later, the West came back, like, adorned in a rainbow flag, and they say, well, now we've got religion, now we've got this new code of ethics, and now we've got this new thing that we were going to force on you. We are religious too now, and here we go. We're going to drop this time. The bombs are like anti-racist and transsexual and all this. Like, now we've cobbled together our own sort of satanic dogma that we're coming back for you again.
Let's give you another 11. I think you're in good running for pole position here, based on my own kind of. I haven't got the sum of your score here, but it feels like you're ahead of the pack. So let's see if you can bring it home with round 6. Literature, software and mathematics, eschatology.
I'll go for literature.
The traditional literary canon is overrated. The distinction between high and low genre fiction is arbitrary, or children's literature is as complex and significant as adult literature.
I think I'll go for the distinction between high and low genre fiction is arbitrary. What would be an example of high literature and low literature? We could say
high literature would be like The Great Gatsby, and low literature would be. So I used to read these pulpy Star Wars extended universe books that were kind of just action romps. That not very well thought of, but kind of enjoyable.
It's funny because I'm looking at my bookshelves today, and I was thinking about doing one of those videos where it's like just my bookshelf, where I just kind of go through it. And I had similar sort of takes, because I was looking through, and I've got. Give me a second. I'm going to cough. I turned my head there, and I got a funny kind of feeling in my throat.
Oh, no.
But what I'm looking at is a funny thing, because on the middle shelf I've got Livy's Rise and Fall of Roman Republic, and then I've got Marcus Aurelius Meditations, and then I've got William Blake, and then I've got Thomas Wolfe, A Man in Full. And then I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, like the first 9 books of the Horus Heresy from Warhammer. Like straight.
Okay, great example there. Yes.
And
the sublime to the ridiculous.
And I'll lay my hands on the table. The Warhammer books have got lots more creases down the spine than the William Blake or the Livy had. Like, but if I'm fair, and I take a look elsewhere, there's some of it. There's a kind of grey zone in the middle, which, I mean, where would Tom Wolfe be on that? I think Tom Wolfe's high, Bonfire of Antis or A Man in Full. I mean, he's kind of like the Charles Dickens of the late 20th century or early 21st century. He took a lot of inspiration from Dickens. And I read A Man in Full when I first moved away, and it said on the back, "This book will be a good friend to you." And it really was. I read it about 4 times, and I think, like, if because of where we are in civilization, in the kind of post modernity, if I'm going to be honest, like, what spoke to me the most, I mean, it's the William Blake's selected poems. I do actually like Blake because he, again, is it touches a little bit on what we were saying about Darwin. It was as if he was predicting this world would happen where there was no more magic or mystery to be found in it. And I do actually, I'm going to put a cap and say, like, I don't normally read poetry, but I do like William Blake. I do like that. But I'm certainly not an expert on poetry. I mean, he would certainly be classed as high, wouldn't he? And then he's just like 2 books away from sort of Fulgrim in Warhammer 40k. But the reason why I'm just looking, because I'm literally just looking at my bookshelf, is that if you look at it that way, where you've got William Blake, then Thomas Wolfe, and then the beginning of the Warhammer, I think that for me it would be that kind of middle road there, where, because what speaks to me, yes, in a sort of, in a kind of hyper real sense of the culture wars, you can kind of, like, Distributors does it a lot about Warhammer, where you can say, at the end of the day, it is a war of belief, and because it's preposterous, because of its pulpy nature, people like that kind of lore, because you can map it on in this hyper real way to culture wars today. I mean, it clearly is order against chaos, and it touches back again on the nature of religion and belief. And it's all pretty depressing as well when you look at how it all turns out. So there is that. You can be, and then if you get caught, and you can say, oh well, it's all, you're getting a bit pretentious because this is literally just cash-in books. Throwaway pulp fiction based on, like, a 1980s board game, then you can always just disavow it and disown it. A lot of the kind of low fiction can have some deep truths in it, but you can then kind of cast it one side and say, well, at the end of the day, yeah, of course, I'm just saying it's a kind of half, like, a sort of cheek and tongue nature, where you can say, well, it has these big ideas about the world, but it's so ridiculous and over the top that you've got a bit of a get out clause, like a lot of films do that. And in something like A Man in Full by Tom Wolfe, you've got much less of a wriggle room, because he's talking about this is, like, I think 2000 it came out, and he's already talking about I don't know if you know it, but there's a magnate, old fashioned sort of business tycoon in Georgia in America, called Charlie Crocker, and he's actually swimming in debt, and he's a kind of a bit of a Donald Trump type figure, very masculine, very high energy, go-getter. But he's swimming in debt, and he ends up being put in a strange position where his friend's daughter gets raped by a famous black American footballer. And he's kind of told by the civil rights type people that if he comes out and celebrates the footballer, gives him some of his high status, they'll make all of his debt go away. But on the other hand, on a more personal level, he knows that he would be betraying his friend and daughter, and you get in all these things. So it's a sort of snapshot of America, even in 2000s, where the system clearly sides with the minority client groups, and all of this kind of thing. And it's aged very well, I'd say. It's kind of preempted preempted the age that we're in. And I think that's a kind of nice Goldilocks zone between the distinction between the high and the low is in that. I don't think it is arbitrary. I think it clearly is high and low, because then to the other side of that you'd have William Blake, which is much more high level. You, to the degree where you read a poem. One of the reasons why I'm coy about these things is because there's big super brains who've been to university and everything, and they could kind of scoff, or they will be able to read more, get more out of William Blake than what I ever will. It depresses me that that I'll never be as good a writer as, say, Oswald Spengler, or who else am I looking at here? Philip K. Dick. I've seen a couple of his books there, and there's a sense that we just can't reach those heights anymore. I mean, I'm looking at Herman Melville's Moby Dick down there. I will never write like that, and no matter how hard I try, and I don't think anybody will. And the difference is that, I mean, it relates to the traditional literary canon is overrated. It really isn't, because we can't match that. We can't match it in music. We can't match it in literature. It is better. Things are getting worse. And again, you can go back and think, well, okay, why is that? And you can think of it on is it a technical thing about sentence construction, or is it something else? Is it a lack of something else? Is it a lack of something spiritual and magic in the culture more generally?
Yeah, and it ties to some of our other. You've actually beautifully dovetailed answers to several of the rounds there, because it links to the music. It links, yeah. So I think I'm going to give you another 11 for this round. Here's the high score table, but without you in it. Let's see where you've come. We have a new winner.
Wow.
Morgoth, you are at the top of the high score table with a blistering 67.
That's
ahead of all these other people. So,
look, and I'm ahead of people like John Dee, who would actually be able to understand William Blake.
You're ahead of Apostolic Majesty. Look at that.
Yeah. Well, I thank God I didn't really touch on any history, but yeah.
Well, actually, neither did he, and maybe that was his mistake. He didn't choose history when it came to that round.
Yeah, I mean, so, Mr. D is somebody who could get more out of William Blake than I can, I think. I've got no qualms about saying that.
Well, congratulations, and thank you for joining me.
Right, thank you very much. I really enjoyed it. It was a nice format. I didn't know what to think, but yeah.
People have had a little bit of trepidation coming into it this year. I assume if I do it again next year, then people will know what to expect. But it's just a little bit difficult to explain, if you see what I mean.
Yeah,
it's just easier to experience it than to.
It's nice. It's nice to go off the beaten track a bit.
It's been really interesting hearing people extemporaneous who normally deliver quite well prepared remarks. And in general, I've been very impressed that people in our circles are speaking from the heart, right? The reason that they're able to just answer these questions off the cuff with so much lucidity is because it's actually reflect something deeply within themselves, rather than they've just like done the bunch of Googling and pasted together a script. Like, it's actually an expression of themselves and their beliefs.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to this. It was good. This.
There you are, Poet of the North at the top of the leaderboard.
Thanks.